Hello and welcome back to the Wisdom Factory. Today we will talk about the topic we touched in last November. It was dying, death and dying, and the occasion was the sudden death of Mark Davenport, my husband and co-host. But today we want to do it not really within this dark subject of death and dying, but we want to put it into conversations that matter, because these conversations really do matter. And we want also to not be so frightened anymore about death and want to get it out of the closet. And that's why I invited Dominique Cassidi, who is can I call you an expert in this topic?
No.
No, but you have...
Call me an expert in about 50 years when I'm dead.
Okay. Yeah, that's true. That's really true. But you are occupying yourself a little bit with that, along with many, many other things. One is Aikido, which I heard, and it's very, very beautiful. And conflict resolution. We met each other on the summit of Miles
Kessler.
The names. I am not good in names. So I'm very interested in what you would share, what you will share with us about your experience. But before we do that, I would invite you to introduce yourself a little bit. Tell people where you are, how you came to all the things you are doing, and so on. From there, we will start.
So I've been always fascinated by the question of happiness. What does it mean to be happy? How to stay happy, how to become happy, how to not lose happiness. That was really the beginning of my adulthood. And progressively, I realized that happiness and peace were very much connected. And I completely fell in love with peace. And so then life kind of become guided by that love, and it expresses itself into different domains. So one domain is my profession as a doctor. I work as a psychiatrist, and I work in a different domain of psychiatry, but one of the domains I work in is in palliative care and psycho-oncology. I also do some work in India, in palliative care in a small hospice in northern India. But also as a psychiatrist, I work on an individual level with patients, and the theme is always like, how do we relate to life? Why do we suffer? And is there a different way to look at life, to look at ourselves, to look at our minds in a way which allows for a deeper peace and a greater sense of happiness to arise? So that's on the kind of a medical level, but I've been since about 20 very much involved in spiritual practices. For many years, Aikido and yoga, and progressively more and more meditation, which has become the ground of my practices. And spiritual inquiry, so also spending quite some time with Buddhist tradition, with Hindu tradition. When I'm in India, I spend about 3 to 5 months every year in India. I spend quite a bit of time with spiritual teachers, and I also study a little bit of those traditions. And so everything goes into the same direction, and it's always that main theme of, how to get in touch with what is essential, how to be more and more in contact with that peace until we realize it is essentially what we are. And how from there can we express happiness, which in the world manifests as love, as wisdom, as beauty, as harmony. So that's a little bit of a summary of
that's wonderful. And when people talk about dying or think about dying, they are not in peace normally at all, but they are fearful. Mm-hmm. So out of your experience, how is it? I have heard that sometimes shortly before dying, and I have also experienced this with people who died and where I was present, that they are coming ever more into acceptance. And I'm wondering if you can talk to that a little bit.
So our human experience is a succession of crises of transformation. Since we're born, we go through event in life and event in ourselves, which puts us in crisis. Crisis meaning that there was a past which is different than now. There's a disruption between a continuity, and that allows for a process of transformation. Sometimes the process of transformation is a very positive one. Someone it gets locked into suffering. So all those stages of life that we have, all those crisis events, growth, conflict, all of those things, which includes getting sick and dying, all of those are, I see them as a moment in time for that contains the possibility of transformation. So all of us have different ways that we respond to dramatic change. And death or preparation to death is one of those stages, and there's no way to predict how a person will go through that process of transformation. So I'm not going to speak of what was after death, because in my understanding, it's a very personal way to look at things, and it's just ideas because nobody would really know. But I've seen many people prepare to die, and many people die. And what I've seen is that I've seen people die in the most unexpected ways. We cannot know in advance. And there's been cases or situations where I was completely desperate for those people. I thought it was really terrible what was happening. And actually, something happened which actually completely transformed the way I was looking at them. I'll give you maybe just some stories.
Yeah, it would be wonderful, yeah.
So one of my patients, it was very early on when I was working in palliative care. One of my patients, she was at 65 years old. She had a pancreatic tumor, and she had been an alcoholic. She was really not an easy person. She was, when she arrived at the hospital, she was a little bit aggressive, on the edge, not easy to speak to, and she was not in any way close to looking at her illness as potentially fatal. Like she was really like, just get me on and I'm going back home. And she was in a terrible physical state, so it was obvious for us, doctors and nurses, that we were not looking at someone who was going to go home. We were looking at someone who was progressively going to go down. So the fact that she was not willing to be there, which is quite often, it requires a huge inner shift for a person to really face and to realize, okay, that's it. That's the moment that I'm actually going to prepare to die. It happens often, but it happens at random times. So for this woman, she was not there. She was very much in denial, in resistance, in anger. And she had not been an easy person. Nobody would come see her, and you could see why. She was kind of dark and sour. She was very, very lonely and really definitely not happy person. And she had been an alcoholic for a long time, so we could just imagine the struggle that she had experienced. And so it went like that for a couple of weeks, and after a weekend I came back and I entered in her room, and something was very different. She used to be sitting on her bed like this, a little bit like, okay, what are you, what do you want, type of attitude. And this time she was laying down, and she was laying down in a bubble just like this on her side, and she looked really comfortable, really quiet. And she saw me, and she said, "Can you come closer?" And so I leaned over, and she said, "What's your name?" And I knew she knew me, and I knew she knew my name. Well, I knew she knew I was Dr. Cassidy. I was her doctor. And so I looked and I said, "I'm Dr. Cassidy." She says, "No. What's your first name?" And I said, "Oh, well, my name is Dominique." And I don't know how it is in your country, but in Switzerland, you don't ask first name to your doctor. It's very formal. I would never ask my doctor, "What's your first name?" and call him like that. Or like that. So she did. And I was like, it's Dominique. And she was like, "Okay, well, Dominique, I want to tell you something." And so I got extremely intrigued and went even closer. And she says, you know, I'm seeing something. We're coming naked. We're living naked. And everything is in between is a gift.
Wow.
And a couple of days later, she died. And so here, right there, was a Buddha, an awakened soul, somebody who was completely vulnerable, open, wise, deeply wise, and extremely generous to include me on a very personal level. She was not looking at me as a doctor. All of that was gone. She was like, let's cut to the crap. It's you as a person, as a human being, as my daughter, as my sister. It was this type of connection. And that was a complete shift, a complete transformation, completely unexpected. And nobody had done anything for it. Mm-hmm. It's a complete grace. And so that really shook a lot of the ideas I had about how we judge people. You know, you could see that person and be like, oh my God, poor woman, you know, that's it. You know, she's going to live, you know, her life has been distress, her death will be distress. And actually, what happened there, I don't know, but it was perfect. And so that's to come to what I was saying before, like there is something completely unpredictable in a process of transformation. Yeah. And as preparing to die is a process of transformation, there is something which is deeply mysterious, magical, profoundly unknowable that occurs at that time. And I always find it very reassuring, bringing a lot of hope. So that's just one.
It's a wonderful example because, you know, it takes away also a little bit the fear. It can take away the fear because you can be somehow expecting that when you go, you might have the insight that's okay. And you don't have to struggle anymore, you know.
A lot of people die without the struggle, actually. What's happening is that if we die slowly, so if we have an accident and, you know, I'm not speaking of those type of death, but they actually are about 10% of all death. 90% of the people, there's some type of progression. And this progression of illness leading to death is usually a process of gradual grieving of what we had and were able to do in life. First, we have to let go of our activities, and then we have to let go of walking, and we have to let go of... So it's a progressive, I think, like a peeling off. We peel off the layers of what was our habitual life and body and ability. And so there's a peel of those layers progressively. So it's very much a process of grieving of our previous life.
Yeah. And also the acceptance that the body is not working anymore like before, and that it's much more difficult. And I think this is a heavy, I imagine that heavy for me, and it was heavy for Mark, to not be able anymore to do the things as before, and, you know, and be dependent on somebody else's help.
Yeah.
That's an ego ego teaching of the hard sword somehow, you know.
So, and in that sense, that peeling off I'm speaking about is very much a spiritual process.
Exactly. That's what I wanted to ask you now, about how far is spirituality helping with that?
If we speak of a spiritual, the spiritual life and the spiritual inquiry as a path that leads us back to what is truly essential, back to ourselves, back to God, back to life, back to peace. For that process, there is, whatever tradition we look at, there is a peeling off. The only reason we're not free spiritually is that we're very much distracted by our identity, our lives, our bodies, what I want, what I don't want, what I need to do, what happens, all of that. So we're so attached and distracted by this dimension of ourselves, that we're actually not looking in a different direction, which goes through all of that, and which takes us to the core of being, the core of what life is and what we are. So every spiritual tradition and religious tradition tends to try to help us to become less distracted by this story and identity, to start to look in a different direction, in that direction of God or light or peace. And so to do that, we have to peel off our attachments, or ideas, or longings, or hopes, everything we have to peel off and stop being distracted by that, so we can actually turn our face and start to look and abide where we truly meet ourselves and meet life. So that's what we do in a spiritual life. When we speak to great mystics and saints, spiritual life is not about getting more at all. It's on the opposite. It's about releasing, letting go, saying goodbye, abandoning, and progressively shedding all of those layers of distractions and attachments and suffering. So the process of dying is exactly that. It's exactly that peeling off of all those layers of what we believe ourselves to be and what we believe life to be, so that we can get in touch with what is truly at the core of all that, which is, ourself with a big O, the truth, the absolute, God, life, the divine.
Yeah, what you're saying, I agree, but I think it's in real contradiction to the present state of the world, where we want to have ever more instead of peel off, and where we think we can fight death by, I don't know, freezing the body or whatever they are doing of research, fighting aging and everything. This seems to be, and also people who have lost faith in the traditions, they are atheists. And what you are saying, how could we tell people the same thing without using spiritual terms? That is a little bit of a challenge. But how could we get this message to people who don't believe in God, let's say, or in whatever?
First, we need to define, because spirituality doesn't mean religious, and spirituality doesn't, in the way I use it, and in the way it is used in the scientific world. Let me just describe it, because actually an atheist for me is deeply spiritual in those definitions. So let me just define first how I use it. Spirituality has been recognized by the Health World Organization as one of the 4 constituents of the individual, of every human being. We have a biopsychosocial and spiritual. We are all those domains. We have a body, which is the biological. We have a social, we have interaction, relationship, family, friends. We have a psychological domain. We all have a psyche, which is more or less healthy and functional. And then we all have a spiritual dimension. So what does one mean by spirituality when we speak of it like that? And there is no consensus on the definition of spirituality. If you look, it's hundreds of different definitions. But one that I find kind of inclusive and allowing to communicate, especially I work in medicine and I use this word a lot. So this way of defining it is making spirituality very approachable for non-religious people. Spirituality would be divided into 2 domains. The first domain would be the domain of the meaning of life. How do I live? How do I live in a way that makes sense deeply, that is connected to my deepest value, my deepest love? How do I live a life which is in line with that? So that's the first domain of spiritual life. And then the other domain of spiritual life is anything that is beyond myself. What is my connection to what is beyond myself? Now, religious people, what is beyond themselves is God. And I don't know how it is in Italy, but in Switzerland, we have about 10% of the population that does believe in God. 90% of the population doesn't believe in God in the traditional way. So for those people, what does it mean, something beyond ourselves that is not God? And if we ask most people, do you feel like you're it? Or do you feel like there is something which is bigger than yourself? Most people would tell you, no, there is something bigger. Artists would tell you it's beauty or creativity. It's bigger than me. It takes me. A mother would tell you love. You know, the love for my child is bigger than myself. Most of us would say that love is bigger than ourselves. Nature, there's something in nature that when I'm there, there's something which is bigger than myself. So that notion of transcendence, that there is something beyond, bigger than just my identity, which is not God. And so I would not put atheists into non-believers, because atheists actually are extremely spiritual. They're very vindictive against other ways of looking at life, and they're very much intrigued and compelled to explore. You can have very beautiful spiritual conversations with atheists, but it's not about God. So this is just wanting to define, because I don't know anybody who's not spiritual. I've never met someone who's not spiritual. I've never met somebody that didn't have a body, a social context, and a mind.
That's beautifully said, because it's just part of a human being. You know? Yeah. And by identifying as God and religion, we have narrowed down the whole thing, and we cannot recognize it anymore in the way we are growing up, that this God is for us. And so when we hear God, we automatically think, oh, that's the guy with the beard, you know, and I'm against he doesn't exist, and things like that. And so we throw the baby out with the bathwater. And your definition is really beautiful. I love that. I love that. So shall we talk a little bit about the meaning of life? Maybe you have some more stories about that. People finding their meaning?
I'm looking at which stories to tell you. Another patient, this time it's a patient in India. She was quite young, actually. She was about 45 or 50, early 50s. But she looked much older. When I saw her file, I was shocked. She was living at the hospice. She passed last year. And she had an ovarian cancer with a broken leg, so she couldn't move from her bed. And it was a terrible situation, because the doctors, as it's often the case in India, didn't tell her that she had cancer. So she had no idea that there was something that serious. And at the same time, she was in her bed, not able to move, with a broken hip that would never heal. She was losing weight. She was not able to do anything. And quite understandably, she was in major anger and suffering. She was in complete distress. And she was really a difficult patient. You would enter in her room and you would be always like, okay, what's going to happen? She would yell at people. She would insult one nurse over the other. She would create challenges in the staff. And she was so vindictive and difficult. And she had a daughter. She was not married. And she had kind of brought her, and her daughter was kind of trying to just survive, getting different jobs, so she couldn't come very often. They were very poor family. And this woman was so very, very difficult, and very difficult to speak to. But one day, with the person in charge of the spiritual domain of the hospice, whose name is Nanima, she's a she's a nun and has a very deep spiritual perspective. We thought, okay, let's just take some time and sit with her. So we came into the room and sat down and started to discuss. And this woman, we asked her a bit about her life and the hardship, and it was just a life of combat, you know, I don't know in what context her husband wasn't there, but for a woman in India to be alone without family, just a daughter and no husband, and having to work, it's just, the social judgment on that would just be quite extreme. And she was from a very low caste too, probably. So she really had it hard. And she said one time, well, you know, I don't have any education. She didn't know how to read and write. I don't have any education, but I have my pride and I have my wisdom. And so we were kind of intrigued, because she became kind of, you know, I have my wisdom. And she said, my wisdom is that I've been here for my daughter. And so she explains that they were extremely poor, and she would not have money oftentimes to eat enough. And so she was describing that quite often she would be with her daughter and she would make one single chapati. It's those flat breads that you roast on fire. And she would have made like one single chapati, and she would say, well, you know, I was going to give it to my daughter, but I knew I couldn't eat it. So I would just place it on my belly and feel like as if I was eating it. I was feeling that energy, and then I would give it to my daughter. And I did it all by myself. I took care of her. I brought her up. And it never failed. And there was such conviction, such strength, and such beauty in this woman. And she completely, you know, she was like, you know, the queen of the universe when she spoke. And that's what happens when we are in line with the meaning of life, of our life, when we are connected and allowed or able to express what is most important. So the meaning of life is not the meaning of life. It's for everybody where we meet truly life. It's where we are the most alive, the strongest, the most certain that something is beautiful and it's true and it's wise and it's loving. And so it can take any shape. There's not one meaning of life. There's just what is the meaning of life for you.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And to find out, I think that's what many people bring to the spiritual journey. They want to find out what the meaning of life is. Is it your experience?
I think we all do, because all of us, 8 billion of human beings, and all of us since the first humans, whatever shape that was, because it's true also for every animal, we want to feel good, we want to be happy. So it's not just, we always really deeply long for this sense of deep contentment, this feeling of being tremendously at peace and fulfilled, and whatever word, it's always too small when I say it. I'm always like, it's not that, because it's bigger. So we all really want, all of us human, we really want to be happy. And because most of the time we fail, we fail miserably, this leads us to question, you know, how the hell does it work? How can I be truly happy? And every spiritual tradition and every spiritual text and every philosophical text, and most of what humans have been doing since the beginning of time, is to answer that question, actually. How to live this life? Tell me how. So the connection between happiness is the meaning of life, is that there's a deep sense of contentment and happiness when we are connected to what we know is essential, which could be spoken as the meaning of life. Yeah,
wonderful. I certainly feel it like this when I feel like inspired, and then that's what I think it's the right thing to do in life, you know. And what I wanted to ask you, you're a psychiatrist, and many people are not happy at all. And when they don't get or don't succeed in their endeavors, they have the tendency to fall into depression and say, yeah, you talk about happiness, yeah, you know, but I'm not there. And, you know, they might even get quite bitter. So I'm wondering, how do you deal with depressive people, or with people who are so, let's say, in despair and don't find at all any piece of meaning in their life?
I really can't answer to that question, because there's so many ways of being depressed. There's so many ways to work at it. Actually, depression is a huge human problem. It's been calculated that by 2020 or 22, I thought it was 20, but that very, very soon depression is going to be the leading cause of invalidity in the world. So we're not speaking of a few people who are, you know, having a little bit of depression. We're talking of a world's movement, which can be, like every movement of that amplitude, extremely, potentially very liberating. because the whole premise of our cultures are based, and it's not new, it was like that at the time of the Buddha and at the time of the Bhagavad Gita. It's not new at all, but there's this belief that we kind of perpetuate, that happiness is about something that will happen outside. And we've been extremely consistent as humans as actually teaching that to each other, just get the right thing.
Yeah, the right partner, the right whatever. All the songs teach us, that somebody brings you happiness. It's really very strong still, despite all our spiritual endeavors, on the other hand,
No, it's a very strong belief. And what's terrible is like we're kind of putting it on each other, we're not helping each other by continuing to believe in it. Actually, we should really change that. What really intrigues me is that, if wealth, if success, if the right partner, the right kids, the right home, the right job, if all of that was bringing you happiness, we would know it. I mean, we've been here for a while as humans. If getting all the right thing was for sure bringing you absolute contentment, we would know it, but it's not the case. And I think, if we have a little bit of a scientific mind, in science, you make a hypothesis and then you test it to verify if it's working. And if it's not working, then you throw the hypothesis and you find for another one. So we've had 4,000 years of experiment of getting the right thing will make you happy. And I think we can pretty safely say that it's not working. And it's like, I think it's time to stop the experiment because we're wasting our time. So if culturally we're not there yet, at least individually, we can start to really ponder in that direction. And one way that I like to explore that with people, whether they are depressed or not, because actually, for me, as long as someone is not fully enlightened, they're suffering and they're in depression. So depression is a scale. You can be functioning really well, or you can be in a hospital, your head below a pillow. But depression is basically this belief that there's something which is not doing well, and that you need something else, and that the way your life is and the way you are right now is not enough, is not complete, and is not at peace, and is not happy. So that's depression. So pretty much everybody I've ever met, except some great saints, I would say people are depressed. And so how do we become free of that? Well, this is exactly what the Buddha has attempted what the Buddha has started to do, 500 before Christ, and he's the first psychiatrist in humanity. The first one who said, "Okay, people, we're suffering. There's a problem here. How can we stop suffering?" And what he did, and this is consistent with many of spiritual tradition, is to start to actually question the validity of our beliefs. The wrong belief makes us suffer. The right belief liberates us. So what are the wrong beliefs that lead to suffering? That lead you, that lead me, that lead all of us. We all have some very, very dysfunctional beliefs, received by our culture, by our families, by life events, by our mind, the mind is such a jewel, and it's such a nasty little bug. It can really go in both directions. So we have all those beliefs in our minds, and they're creating tremendous suffering.
Yeah, and I also think that most people don't even realize that what they believe is a belief. They think that's reality.
Well, and we all do, because the deeper we go on the path, the deeper, the more we realize, thought that I believed were true, actually now I see they're not.
And that is destabilizing a little bit, so you need to be quite strong to allow that, to recognize that it is a belief, and not to grasp on the identity which you have formed by these beliefs. And at the moment, seems to be so much about these identity things, I'm that, and I'm that, and I have a right to that, and all these things. It's crazy. Maybe, as you said before, it's something needs to be first become so big before it can transform into something new. I mean,
it's always been like that. Everything in our world is based on a dual response. So there's a movement, and then there's this equal and opposite movement, and everything has been growing like that. Actually, spiritual teachings are like that. You know, one teacher says that, and the other one says, "Well, I don't agree with you. It's that," and then another one says, "Well, it's about that." And so everything has been built by opposition and conflict, which is actually very creative. But yeah, there's a direct connection, if we wanted to bring back to the question of dying, there's a direct connection to the fear we have of dying and to the resistance we have to the idea of our own death and our attachment to our identity.
Exactly, yeah.
The degree that I'm attached to a separate sense of me, to the degree that I believe that there's a separate sense of me, to that degree, the idea of death is unbearable. The idea of letting go is unbearable. Oftentimes we speak of a spiritual process as a process of death. And it is true that the moment of when we have either a glimpse or a more consistent understanding of our real nature, something dies. And what dies is the previous firm belief that this is it. I'm this. And you're that. So the degree that we are attached to that belief, that I'm me and I'm separate from the world and I have a beginning and I have an end, I'm limited, I'm defined, you can localize me, you can describe me, you can hurt me, you can love me. As long as we're defining ourselves as that limited self, then the concept and the idea and the belief and the thought of death is a challenge. So the only remedy to the fear of death is either a surrender to a trust in God. Either we completely, deeply trust that there is a God, an ultimate power, or a meaning of life bigger than myself that I can just completely let myself be taken by, or we have to, with knowledge, with understanding, and with experience, we have to realize that what I am essentially, what you are essentially, what we all are, is what creates all of that, what perceives all of that, what is the essence of all of that, what contains the whole universe, what contains the whole movement of life. What I am essentially is not Dominique and her age, her body, her life, her abilities, her desires, and all of that. What I am essentially is that which speaks, that which hears, that which sees, but that what we cannot grasp, we cannot describe, we cannot, but there is something there, a presence, a grandiose something, a silence, whatever name we want to give it, and that's what we truly essentially are. And when we get in touch with that dimension, then we see, not just intellectually, but also we see in our heart that whether this body mind is here or not, it's not changing anything to who I am. The beautiful question somebody asked Ramana Maharshi, he was dying. You've heard of Ramana Maharshi, very powerful non-dual teacher in the 50s. He was dying actually of cancer too, and he was dying, and somebody asked him, well, what's going to happen after you die? You know, hoping for some type of, well, after death there's this and that, and Ramana says, where do you want me to go? I'm here. So that's a level of spiritual freedom which liberates completely someone from the duality of death and life. The ultimate cure for the fear of death and for suffering actually is spiritual realization.
Yeah, and that leads me to the question, as you have stated, well, that's not just changing a belief with another belief, and maybe people go to spiritual teachers to find a new belief instead, but the realization needs to happen in some other way. So How can that happen? We talked about it, that at the end of life, sometimes it happens, maybe often, I don't know, that this realization comes by itself. And I think most people who go to the spiritual way think that they can make it happen. So what is your take on that?
It's a very important question, actually. And there's always been a lot of debates in spiritual circles since the beginning. You know, is there something to do to realize the truth or to awaken, or not? And both the opposite answers are equally true. So there's one answer that says, well, what can you do to realize what you already are? And you can't do anything to realize what you already are. The wave cannot do anything to realize it is water. It is that by essence, and the only thing it needs to do is see it, but there's no doing there. So that's the direct path, or the instantaneous spiritual practice, where you just see that what you are. And then there is...
We want to make us see, you know, we want to do something to be able to see.
So if you're not seeing, if it's not coming, because that's a movement of grace. I don't think I don't think I've ever heard someone say, well, if you do that tomorrow, right now you'll be awakened. Awakening, or whether it's a glimpse or whether it's a more profound shift and transformation, it happens. But now, it doesn't mean that because it just happens by itself, it doesn't mean that there's nothing to do for that. And I definitely think that there's a lot to do for that. And I'm going to sum up just by saying that basically the only thing we can really truly do is stop being distracted by everything that is not that.
Can you say more to that?
Yes. So basically we're so fascinated by our mind. And our mind just keeps talking about a me. Me, the world, me, the world, me, the world, me, the world, right? I mean, this is pretty much, if we look at everybody's mind, it usually refers to one of those two things. It's about me or about the world, and me and the world. And we are just like, if you put a child in front of a video game and the child is just like, you talk to the child and the child doesn't even hear you, take the thing and the child will follow you. There's this incredible fascination. And this is how we are with our identity. We are incredibly fascinated. We are like so desperately attached to it. And this is like the focus of everything. And so because of that, we're not able to look anywhere else. So if I take again the example of a wave wanting to realize water or the ocean, as long as the wave is like worried about, okay, my left side and then this little glimpse of water and going a little bit higher and a little bit faster, and that's the other wave there, and then, how do I look compared to the other one? As long as that wave does that, what's the probability it's going to just realize it's the ocean? It's just too busy. Mm-hmm. We're just too busy. Placing our attention at the wrong place. So then how do we stop being busy? And this is what basically most spiritual traditions are teaching, like stop being worried about yourself and start looking somewhere else. Start doing something else with your mind. Start asking different questions. Start doing something else with your time. How is it when instead of triggering all of our actions and activities to fulfill this self? How is it when we start to act just to serve, for example? And how is it instead of being worried about our future, we train our mind to become just more present now? How is it instead of looking at all the things we don't have and all the things we could have and all the things the other have, and how would it be to start cultivating gratitude? Because I'm just speaking, I'm breathing, I'm being alive, and it's so incredible. So there is all of those activities, which is to learn to stop doing what we've been doing this time until now, which is to focus on me, my world, my life. And that creates space. It creates space for that magical, incredible shift of seeing that where suddenly we realize, I'm not what I thought I was. I contain her. I express myself as her. I use this vehicle to dance, to create, to make love, to share, to all of that. But whether she's here or not, it's not changing anything to that perfection.
I do think that many people, most people have had this experience, but they don't call it like this. As you said, dancing, for instance, when you are very much inspired, or painting, whatever the passion is, and you are there, and this is a way of being just in the presence and living that, you know, but we don't see it as spiritual or whatever.
That's too bad. I think that's a wrong, but that's a, it's all beliefs. Everything, everything I say are highly conditioned. There's nothing true in what I'm saying. It's just a way to speak of it. So it's limited. It's conditioned by what I've learned, my inner experience, blah, 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 blah. So all of our beliefs are equally conditioned. So no belief is real in an absolute sense. They're just relative. Yeah. All of our beliefs are relative. But we can choose beliefs that are anyway relative, but we can choose some that are highly functional. And so what about looking at our beliefs and starting to choose beliefs that create more joy, more happiness, more sharing and more love? So it's just a matter of starting to really question what do we firmly believe in, and how do we limit life in the box with that?
Yeah, and still it's not easy, no? Even if you know that you can change beliefs, sometimes they are so compelling that they have such a grip on you that you really have to, let's say, work hard to let them go. And out of my experience, when I'm very much upset or angry or whatever, then change a belief. That's not a way, you know, but you have first to be more in a relaxation state and more beginning to see again maybe nature, wonderful sun outside, or a flower or something that can give you a moment of opening. And then from there you first think, oh, it could be maybe different. And then try to find more of these let's say, situations where you get reminded that there is something else than where you are just now in this tunnel view of, oh, it's also horrible and also I don't know what. And then it's like a miracle when it shifts. I just experienced it lately, you know, when I was relieved of a certain situation, and then it's like, oh yeah, you know, and it's like life coming back in some way, you know, when you succeed to get out of this downward spiral of mental conditioning, also external conditioning, because external does do their part in your sense of being, you know, but get both together, and instead of going down, go up and be alive again. And it's possible, but it's not easy, and that's probably why we need somebody or a coach or a spiritual teacher or whoever to help with that, because alone is sometimes difficult. And I think also with death, and that's a little bit why we do this sort of conversations, if people are attracted to the topic, that they can find a different way of looking on these, and meeting you with your positive emanation, with your joy, with your, oh, it's so beautiful. I mean, it's really, 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 really beautiful how you express aliveness and peace and joy. Yeah. Despite we were talking about serious topics, no? Mm. Yeah, we are almost at the end of the hour, and I would love if you have still something to give people who are watching, something to give them on their way, or some inspiration, some advice, some whatever you feel has not yet been said.
Let me just tell you one last story then.
Yeah. Okay.
A couple of years ago, we were with a very old monk. He'd been in India for 50 years. One of my spiritual guides, so a very long-term monk, very, very profound, very deep man. And we were with him when he prepared to die and where he eventually died. And it was extremely beautiful to watch someone with that spiritual perspective, you know, and so grounded spiritually and so devoted to his path. One day, I was sitting beside him and he took my hand and he looked really mischievous. He had been a very strong, stern man, you know, like not a cute little guy. He was a really powerful man. He would come out of his room and he'd be like, oh, you know, it was a very, very powerful person. But when he, you know, when people prepare to die, a huge change in their personality, in something that, like layers of who they were before is gone. And so he became like a very, very cute child, and he would like hold your hand and touch you, which he had never done before. So anyway, it was lovely. I was sitting on his bed with him and he was holding my hand and he was so cute. And which is not in any way a word you would have used for him before, cute. Anyway, so he looked at me very mischievously, you know, very and he said, you know, something is gone. And I said, oh yes, Swamiji, what's gone? And he said, resistance.
Yeah.
So how is it to let go of resistance? Because he died awakened. He died in complete surrender, in complete peace. It was incredibly beautiful to witness that. But what he said there was absolutely essential. Like, how is it to stop resistance? It's just because the wave is resisting that it is not saying that it is the ocean. The only reason why we're afraid of death is because we're resisting who we truly are. So to just remain with that sense of inner resistance, where is it coming and how is it to very lovingly, very gently, not bad resistance, pushing it away, which is another resistance, but how is it to see that resistance as part of our very, very, very ancient human conditioning. It's not about you, it's not about me. There's nothing new there. All humans have been afraid, all humans have been resisting. I mean, not all, some of them have gone above it and transcended it, and this is why we can do it now, because they share their wisdom. But this is a very old habit of our humanity to resist what is, what I want, what is happening. And there's something so beautiful when this resistance comes, and instead of receiving it with anger or even more resistance or despair, which is another way, like, oh no, you again. How is it to welcome that resistance with full understanding? Like, oh, you're just doing your work, you're just doing your job of resisting. And I understand it, but I really, really don't believe that this is the answer. I know you're not really what I am. You're not really speaking of what is the most powerful and beautiful and shining in life. And I will not listen to you, and I will let you dissolve, and please go at peace. So how is it to welcome the resistance and just letting it dissolve and not engaging in it? And progressively, I'm not saying it's like do it once and it's over, but there's some resistance that take you here and be gentle. Okay, this one I can't handle today, and that's okay. I feel resistance, anger, and all of that. It's not today, but another day, and then another one comes, and oh, this one, oh yeah, you go, and it's a very gentle, humble movement towards releasing that inner tension that creates so much suffering and that just distracts us.
That's wonderful. And I also think the resistance in itself had a sense for evolution of humankind, because without resisting to all the outside world challenges, we couldn't have survived. But then we sort of exaggerate and keep it in ways we I think life is mainly resisting. And then it makes sense that taking off the layers is loosening the sense of resisting and not blaming it anymore, first accepting it and then loosening it, as you described so beautifully with this monk, that he, at the end of a long spiritual journey, he could give up all resistance. So that's really beautiful. And that's what we can hope for us, no? When we are there. And it's a lifelong journey. We don't need to be there yet when we are 5 years or 20 years or something. We have that lifetime to learn these things, you know, I guess. Yeah, that's wonderful. I thank you so much for this. You see, I'm inspired completely. Talking about death. I thank you very much. And would you like to share, do you have a website or where people can connect with you?
Yeah, just DOMINIQUECASSIDY.com. I have a website there. And I also organize once a month online meditation where there's a long guided meditation and then time to share about it. And it's a group of usually committed seekers and meditators, and everybody's welcome. It's once a month, and it's all on my website.
Okay, thank you so much, and
well, thank you for the opportunity.
All of us.
It's been very enlivening for me too. So thank you.
Thank you, and you watchers, thank you that you are here, and come back. We will every now and then have some topics on death and dying and illness, but not only, many inspiring other things too in the wisdomfactory.net. Bye-bye, see you.